right, guys, first we have our first topic, breaking the stigma and getting unstuck, a real talk about mental health. I want to welcome Brandy Stinson. She's going to introduce herself and get this segment started.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Awesome. Well, good morning. As April said, we have survived so much over the last couple of years. And so, if nothing else, can you just give yourself a pat on the back or a hand clap for surviving? I mean, we talk about a global pandemic. We have been fighting racial injustices. And not just that, but there are so many things that have been happening on a global level. And we've been managing everyday life and trying to keep it together all at the same time. So I think that, again, that just deserves a pat on the back. But as April said, I'm excited to be here. My name is Brandy Stinson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, licensed in Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and New York. And so I have provided mental health services in an array of settings, from the criminal justice system, prisons, jails, courts, to inpatient hospitals, in-home therapy, in schools. I've worked with children, adults, couples, you name it. I've probably done it in the last 15 years of my career. So I hope that doesn't age me too much because I'm 25, okay? Amen? All right, I'm saying that like we're at church, so. Now, Right. So I do have to tell you, though, that when I feel comfortable, when I feel at home, my Alabama accent, it just happens to come it just jumps out without me even knowing it. So if it's okay, if my accent jumps out, just know that it's because I'm comfortable and we're family, right? All right, so let's talk back. So when I talk to you, I want this to be interactive. So I'm going to ask questions and things of that nature because, like I said, we're going to talk to each other. This is more like a conversation. So today we're going to talk about breaking the stigma and getting unstuck. Real talk about mental health. So I know that in the last couple of years, mental health has kind of been a buzzword on social media. And we've heard all of the buzzwords, you know, check on your strong friends, get therapy, things of that nature. But today we're going to have a really candid conversation about what that looks like, because unfortunately, there are still people who are kind of stuck in where they are and haven't quite taken that next step to get the help that they need. And the biggest thing is knowing that you're not alone. When we talk about destigmatization, that means breaking the myth that you're alone in what you have experienced or in what you're experiencing. And we're going to just do away with that today. Is that all right? All right, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so I have a question for you. How are we really showing up? And that's something to think about, because when we pass people on the street, when we meet people, oh, how are you? And what do we say? I'm fine, I'm good, how are you? We immediately deflect, right? We immediately turn it around and say, oh, good, girl, how are you? But how are you really? How are you really showing up on your job, in your homes, in your families, in your relationships, friendships? And how are you showing up for you? Right? Those are just some questions that you can just kind of ponder on. How am I really showing up? Next slide. What do the statistics say? So statistics say that women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety as men. 1 in 5 adults have a mental health disorder. That's whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. So even if you take a look around this room, or anytime you're in a crowd, look around. That's 1 in 5 people have a mental health disorder, right? Or a mental health diagnosis. Women are more likely to be affected by depression than men. That means the symptoms actually showing up, or how the symptoms are influencing their daily life. Suicide is the second leading cause of death between ages 10 and 34. Okay? These are just statistics from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. People with depression have a 40% higher risk of developing cardiovascular and metabolic diseases than the general population. So mental health is not just something that stays up here. We're seeing mental health start to affect here. We talk about aches and pains and other medical conditions. Mental health isn't just something that's happening in our brains, because our brain, guess what? It sends signals to other parts of our bodies, right? So we have to kind of look at a whole health approach to mental health. And mood disorders as well, as well as trauma is showing up in our bodies as well. I work very closely with a colleague who is a trauma specialist, and she talks all the time about how trauma can kind of get stuck in the body. There's a book out called The Body Keeps Score. You know what I'm talking about. And it talks about how trauma can literally get stuck in your body. And it used to be that when we talked about trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, we focused on soldiers. We focused on individuals who served in the military, who might have gone active duty. We thought about Vietnam. We thought about Operation Iraqi Freedom. We thought about Afghanistan. You think about those kinds of things, but PTSD is not limited to serving in the military. Post-traumatic stress disorder can happen to anyone who experiences a traumatic event. And so we'll get more into that in just a moment. Next slide, please. So sometimes we don't know what areas we are struggling with until we pause. And either that pause is intentional or it's unintentional. And trust me, you would rather that pause to be intentional, meaning that you recognize the signs, you recognize that there's something wrong, than for it to be unintentional. And what that may look like is that you actually have a nervous breakdown. You actually can't get out of bed because you're feeling depressed. And now people are worried about you. Or you actually do start to have thoughts of suicide because you've been suffering with depression or anxiety so long, you haven't reached out to get any help, you haven't told anybody, and so you really start to feel that you're alone in what you're experiencing. Well, we don't want you to get to that point. We want to start to get you the resources now so that when you recognize the signs, you can reach out and get the support that's needed. Okay, next slide. So, I wrote a book, this is a shameless plug. I wrote a book called The Power of Overcoming, and it's 6 essential lessons to help you recognize the power within, because I wanted to give just a quick read on, there's 6 key areas that I found that people were really getting stuck in. Okay, and it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle edition as well. But these are areas that people often get stuck. And I was seeing this in private practice, in my clinical setting. I also work with veterans every day, so I was seeing it also in my work with veterans. And so I wanted to address these areas and kind of give a personal take on how you can recognize some areas that you may be stuck, as well as give a clinical overview as well. Next slide. So here are some areas that I found that people often get stuck. And the first one is grief. And so one of the popular things that is shared is that grief comes in 5 stages, right? How many of you have heard of the 5 stages of grief? Yeah. So by now we could probably recite them all, right? And then that's all fine and dandy until you actually start grieving and you realize that grief is not going in the same pattern that you thought. Grief is not going in the pattern that you read about, right? And so many times when there's a major loss, meaning it doesn't have to be just the death of a person that you loved. It could have been a loss of a job. It could have been loss of a romantic relationship. It could be going through a divorce. It could be someone losing custody of their children. It could be grieving, what you thought your future would look like or what you thought your present would look like, and that's not how it looks. But grief doesn't go in any particular order. And so what happens when you start to grieve, but then you feel overwhelmed or you don't get the support that's needed, you can kind of get stuck in it, especially if you don't allow yourself to feel whatever it is that you're feeling at that moment. And grief can be pretty scary. How many of you have ever grieved anything before, right? It can feel pretty scary. It can be overwhelming, right? And so what typically happens is people get stuck because they're not quite sure like what is happening to me, and they can bottle those emotions in and never really move through it. The next one is rejection. That means rejection from, it could be from a person, it could be, you know, you applied for a job, didn't get the job. Whatever has, you know, occurred that may cause you to feel that you just were not good enough or you just did not measure up. So sometimes we get stuck in feelings of rejection. We take it personal. Then we have trauma or loss of identity. And again, trauma is not limited to serving in the military. Trauma is any time you have an experience and you do not have the ability to cope with that experience in a healthy manner. And so it sticks with you and it starts to impact your daily life. I have a story. I have a friend who had a car accident. She was hit by someone who was driving while intoxicated. And one day we were talking and she shared with me that she was having some nightmares about the accident. She was also having some sporadic crying spells and some other symptoms. And after listening to her, I said, well, how long has this been going on? This was probably about a month out from the accident. And she said, well, it's really been going on for the last month. I'm just now kind of speaking out about it because I'm concerned I may need some help. And I said, well, it sounds like that experience was pretty traumatic for you, especially because you had a child in the car. And she said, well, no, I don't think it was that bad. I don't think it was traumatic because there were people who've gone through worse, right? And what I said to her was, well, the thing about trauma is that it's not traumatic. The definition of trauma is not based upon somebody else's experience with it. It's traumatic if it happened to you and the way that it affected you specifically. So don't compare your experience or how that experience affected you to someone else and say, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. I didn't die or anything, or I didn't end up in the hospital in a coma, but still you're having some residual effects, so it may have been traumatic for you, right? There's also regret. I see this a lot as well, like I said, in private practice. A lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda thinking. That's my life would be further along if I had gone to college and gotten that degree, if I had gotten that job. You know, I should have taken this specific career path or what have you. So there's definitely a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda thinking, a lot of regret about if I had taken another path, my life would look differently or my life would be better, right? And then of course there's failure. So I have this funny story where as much as I talk about, you know, my career or how many states I'm licensed in or what have you, or my experience, it wasn't an easy road, right? I had rejection and feelings of failure in that path. So when I was in undergrad, I decided I wanted to be a counselor. And so I was like, what would be the best way to be a therapist? And I was like, I need to be a psychologist, right? Like I need to get a PhD or a PsyD or what have you. So I'm gonna have to apply to some program where I can become a psychologist, right? So I applied to 5 different programs. I researched the top 5 psychology programs for a master's degree. I sent off my applications with my essays and my letters of recommendation. And I was like, you know, I'm gonna get into at least 2, right? Because I got the GPA. You know, your girl worked hard, right? I was like, I'll get into at least 2. And then they started replying back to me about my application. And the letters started to come in, and guess how many I got accepted to? 0, not 1. I was like, you mean to tell me nobody wants me? Nobody wants me at their school, really? So it was in that moment I remember saying, maybe counseling isn't for me. Maybe that's my sign from God or from the universe that like, girl, maybe that was his tap on the shoulder, like, girl, just go do something else. Like, go to law school, or just don't do anything. Just, you know, like, what are you doing with your life? But it was in that moment that I had to make a choice, that either I knew that this was my career path or I didn't. And I had to be real. Am I going to allow this feeling of failure, these feelings of rejection to stop me? Or am I just going to find another way? And so I talked with a colleague who suggested, well, maybe you should get your master's in social work, because if you want to do therapy, you can still get your master's in social work, you can still get licensed, you can still do all the things that you wanted to do. And so, long story short, that was exactly what I did, and that path was so easy. Like, God had a plan in all of that. But imagine if I had stopped. Imagine if I allowed, I mean, okay, it's bad enough that I felt rejected after I got rejected from one school, but come on, 5, that was a bit much. They were doing the most, right? But I just found another way. And so that's the key to not getting stuck, is knowing that there is another way. That path may not be your path, but there is a path for you. Next slide. How does this relate to mental health? So what we know about mental health is that when a person starts to have symptoms of mental health, meaning depression, anxiety, you start to be under a lot of stress, that may impact your self-esteem, right? Because whatever's going on that's causing that depression or that anxiety or that stress is impacting your self-esteem, and in turn, your self-esteem may be impacted by the fact that you are now, struggling with anxiety or depression, or, you have a lot of stress, or you went through a traumatic situation. And so they work hand in hand. Mental health can affect your self-esteem, and your self-esteem can be affected by your mental health. Imagine the person who, we talk a lot about the superwoman syndrome. Imagine the woman who is so used to having it all together, and now she can barely function because her anxiety is so high every day. She leaves home, she goes out in public, but she can barely concentrate at work, and her performance is starting to be affected, right? So all of these things are connected. Next slide, please. So how do we break the stigma and silence the shame? Number one, we have to understand that mental health does not mean damaged. So if you have a mental health diagnosis, that does not mean that you're damaged. That does not mean that you cannot live a fulfilling life. That does not mean that you can't still accomplish the dreams and the goals that you have. I have worked with individuals who are very high functioning, who are top level executives, who are taking medication for depression, and they are doing well. They're following their regimen. They're doing everything that their psychiatrist tells them to do, along with their primary care doctor. So having a mental health diagnosis does not mean damaged. And we have to understand, again, that you can have a routine life and still be caring for your mental health. So that doesn't mean that, if you're struggling with depression now and you're struggling to find the energy every day just to get out of bed, understanding that it won't always be like that. If someone that discloses that they're struggling with their mental health, ask them, how can you support them, right? Even if they say, I just need you to check on me every day, text me. Even if I don't respond, I just need to know that someone is there. Be willing to listen and provide the support that they tell you that they need in the way that they tell you that they need support. Also, you can become an advocate for both your health, your mental health, as well as for those around you, their mental health as well. Okay, and I'm going to throw out some resources here in just a moment for how to do that. Next slide, please. How do we begin to let go of our own stuff? Because we know that caring for our health and our mental health starts at home, right? So number one, we have to make a choice to begin the process of forgiving ourselves for past mistakes and past missteps. That's not getting stuck in regret and failure, feelings of failure. Make a choice to let go of the shoulda, woulda, coulda thinking, because again, I see that a lot, especially in adults. And understand that that you deserve the same grace that you give to other people because you made the best decision that you could at that time given the information that you had. Also, release the need to carry the shame and guilt for harm that was inflicted upon you. And so this could be, again, for anyone who has experienced childhood trauma, where we start to talk about abuse, we start to talk about neglect. I've seen people carry that shame and that guilt for a very long time. And so start working to be able to release that shame and that guilt. And then embrace the support of others and making a conscious effort not to fall into traps of jealousy and comparison. And I had to throw that in there because we are such a social media driven society. We look online, we see everybody's highlight reels, and we don't know what they are going through behind the scenes. We don't know what steps or what missteps they may have gone through to get to where they are. And so in a world where, again, we're showing all of the good stuff on social media, let's not fall into the traps of jealousy or comparison and feeling like your life is bad compared to some information that someone chooses to share with you on social media. Next slide. So here are just some intentions that you can write down. You can take a picture of it. But these are also just some ways to be able to let go of those 4 things that I just talked about by saying, today I choose to forgive myself for. And you can fill in those blanks. Today I let go of the need to carry. I let go of the need to carry guilt. I let go of the need to carry shame. I let go of the need to carry other people's burdens or other people's stuff when I know that I'm struggling, right? Today I make the choice to stop beating myself up because I feel that I should have ... differently or what have you. And today I make the choice to embrace support for my mental health by. And there are multiple ways that you can do that. You can go to psychologytoday.com to look for a therapist, and there you can actually search by zip code. You can actually see pictures and specialties and all of that. There's therapy for Black girls. There's also a blackfemaletherapist.com where you can actually, and there's also therapy for blackmen.com where you can look for a therapist whose specialty is also Black men, for working with Black men as well. And here's the key. The therapist doesn't have to be a psychologist. You can go to licensed clinical social workers, licensed marriage and family therapists, licensed professional counselors as well. And us Black clinicians, we are out here, fam. Like you're going to see an array of professionals today. So we're out here, we're doing the work. So look for us, we're here. Next slide, please. And also, let's keep in touch. I am on social media. I have a website. I founded a nonprofit for women called pearlsofesther.com. If you scan this barcode with your phone, you should be able to keep in touch as well. Follow my Instagram. And so now we can open it up for questions and answers. I think we have just a couple minutes to do so. 2 minutes for questions and answers. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm going to turn it. Do you have a question? Where am I from? I am from Atlanta, Georgia. So, very good. Yes. How do I take care of myself? Ooh, that's a very good question. Some days I'm better at it than others, but I set good boundaries. I had to learn very early on to know when I am mentally and emotionally not in a good space, because even as clinicians, we get there too. We've been going through a global pandemic and, you know, marching and protesting and all of the things over the last couple of years as well, and sitting with people in their stuff in therapy sessions too. So when I know that my cup is full, I don't allow anyone to call me and dump on me. So if someone texts me, "Hey girl, can you talk? I need to vent." I'm not available right now. And it took me a while to stop feeling guilty for that, because I felt like, well, I'm a therapist. I work with people all day long with their stuff. Why can't I do this for my friends as well? But it was recognizing that I don't have to. And sometimes it's best for me to know when my cup is full, because I can't serve other people when I'm empty. And when I'm feeling empty, that means I need to take a pause and work through my stuff. So boundaries has been the key. Yes. All right, well, I'm gonna turn it back over to the host. So, thank you all, and I hope that you can stay and listen to all of the other clinicians who are here today. Please take advantage of all of the good information that's going to be shared here at the Health Hub. Thank you.